Welcome to the midweek show, guys. Is there a difference between a flat and an apartment? Is it not just the same thing? Who knows? QVT. Let's be honest. Is there really a difference between a flat and an apartment?
They're all the same.
I mean, let's look at this, right? Right, guys. If you're watching out there, you're listening in to the podcast, please feel free to make any comments, any suggestions. Chip into the show as well. More than happy to take your comments and what you think as well. Is there a difference between a flat and an apartment? This is what today's midweek show is all about. An apartment's over 100 grand, and a flat's under 100 grand, my friend said recently. Well, joking aside, there is actually no difference. Call it what you will, the humble apartment and the flat has actually served Fife well over the years. The average sale price of an apartment in Fife was £137,940. Most people in Leaving, they'll be going, really?
No, when I read that, I thought...
Because it's nowhere near that. It's maybe taking into account St Andrews, though. Remember, it's the average. There's ones below and there's ones above.
Yeah.
And it does make an excellent first-time buyer purchase and also an excellent buy-to-let investment. In this show today, we're going to be talking about what we want to look about is an apartment and a flat in Fife and how it could solve the country's or the county's housing crisis rate, basically. How a flat and an apartment can actually solve that housing crisis. Where does the word apartment derive from in the first place? Have you got any knowledge on this?
You mean apartmente?
Why is it an apartment?
It's apartamenti, apparently, is where it came from. So originally derived from France. It comes from the word apartamenti, which is also Italian, for the word apartamanino, apparently. And the core of the Italian word apartare means to separate, as in a separate building. So it comes from Roman times when housing costs were so expensive within the cities that savvy property owners split houses or separated them, hence the separation part of it. And those houses then basically became apartments and flats as they're known today. And that's really where it originated from.
Yeah, this was quite interesting because Andrea says, you're absolutely right, Andrea. I think some people call a flat an apartment because it sounds posher. Yep.
True. And that's maybe where the average one comes in.
Because when you think about it, your typical ex-local authority flat, I mean, fair enough, they're in St Andrews, but I would actually refer to them as apartments because they're a different price point. And yet the same property in another area, I would actually refer to them as a flat. I think it's a lot to do with price. I think it's a real lot to do with price, definitely. I mean, what about the word flat, Richard? Do you know anything about that, where that comes from? Why is it called a flat?
Yeah, I mean, the word flat is derived, it's a Scottish word, so it's derived from an old Scottish word. And it's the word flet, or obviously fleet, if you want to do it that way, but fleet with the two T's. So I would say flet. And the flet is an interior of the home. Some also think that the phrase is stuck, as most flats are on one floor. So obviously, anything that's on one floor that doesn't have any stairs.
About that, yeah.
And so by definition, the accommodation is all on the flat. And like I say, i.e., no stairs.
But then, okay, that makes sense. The country has an enduring housing shortage. There's not enough homes being built. And even though the government is aspiring to build 300,000 homes annually to match the demand, that's the combination of the UK government and its total with the Scottish government and the English government demand to keep up with the cost of affordable housing. Less than 250,000 houses were built in 2019, and that's the best rate in the last decade. Hardly anything's getting built at all. You know that yourself, right through Scotland, and that's why some say that the simple solution to Britain's housing problem is to build more apartments and flats. And this is now, if you go to cities, now I was down in London at the weekend, and I just thought I'd throw that in.
Were you seen Coldplay by any chance?
When it was nice and sunny, and it was really hot, 2 degrees more than it was here, and it wasn't raining at all.
And you went to see the best concert of your life.
Yeah, it did actually. Coldplay was really, really good. So when you think about it, it makes logical sense to actually, because of your space utilization, if you've got a block and it's on one big plot, it's a similar argument about bungalows. It's like a bungalow takes the same plot size as probably a house does, but a bungalow you can only get 2 beds in, where a house is on 2 levels, you can get maybe 4 beds in. Well, when a flat is in, and you do an apartment block, then you are effectively putting a huge amount into that one concentrated area, which is why you see a lot of high-rise apartment blocks in big cities. Is this something that's going to continue? Richard, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, especially from an investment point of view and a social housing point of view.
I think that it is a really good resolution to the issue that we're having with, obviously, we'll go on to speak about space and things at the moment, but the popularity of 2 and 3 bedroom houses in the recent years for let has been it's been really popular. But I think people overlook apartments and flats, or whatever you want to refer to them as. They let really well. Jim, you referred to the ex-local authorities flats that we have, the 4 in the blocks, whether it's St Andrews or whether it's Leaving. These are, typically people think of 2 and maybe 3 bedrooms, but we've got like 4 bedroom apartments and things, and they make amazing family homes. And
I love these ex-local authority properties because they were made with huge bedrooms, double bedrooms, and you had a real good sized living room as well. I mean, the kitchen wasn't anything, to write home about, but everything else was really big. And then when you looked at the back and the front gardens and stuff like that, and the off-street parking, they were huge as well. So you can't get that anymore. I mean, when they build something now, you're literally got a wee postage stamp at the back, and most properties actually have communal drying areas now and communal seating areas because they can't afford to have individuals.
It's true. I mean, I grew up in one of those that you described. So my parents lived opposite Richard, actually, as it turns out.
Yeah, we grew up in the same street.
And that was fourplex, and it never really felt like you were living in an apartment because there was 3 large bedrooms. There was a really long hallway. There was a good-sized family bathroom. The kitchen was big. The lounge was big. You had your front garden, your back garden. You actually felt like you were living in a house and you had so much space within it. And they really are popular just now. And I never ever felt that we were squashed on anything, and we had the same outdoor space as our friends. And like Richard would play in his garden probably, and I could still play in mine. And so there was no real difference other than theirs wasn't the same kind of build. But actually for families all along that street, those houses were full of like 3, 4, 5 children families living quite happily in a great amount of space. And you just don't get them like that now. If you look at the ones that have been built in Leaving, on some of the old sites where Brannigan's and that were, none of them have outdoor space. They might have that kind of little tiny balconies on a couple of them, but they're really small. And if you're putting families in there, that can be quite restrictive if you've got young children, no garden to play, can't it?
Yeah, I think the new generation rent is aimed at just professional people, just couples, no kids, and I think that's where these types of properties are in the larger blocks and apartment blocks. Whether that's going to be a monstrosity in the future, only time will tell. Because you know what happened with things like Cullen and Durris and Glenrothes. I mean, they were all hailed as the next big revelation of apartment blocks, and then now they've started to tear them all down because they're non-mortgageable. But in the way they were built,
I think there's only 3 of them left, three blocks left. But I mean, they were hailed as the next the solution to housing. But I mean, the communal areas and things, and they're just not good at all.
Yeah, Mark makes a great point there, and I'd shown it before about what about a former detached villa converted into 2 flats. Effectively, you're absolutely right, Mark. Yeah. That's what's happening as well. We're seeing a lot more bigger properties actually, especially down south because there's huge demand for HMO and student lets as well. HMO, so you're getting these big, massive properties actually converted into bedsits, and the planning regulations are becoming more and more relaxed to allow that to happen because they realise they have a real shortage of properties, so they're having to convert quite a lot. They've even given permission things like to look at the old office apartment blocks and actually just convert them into flats and apartments as well.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think there's a new revelation on the horizon, if that makes sense, and the fact that people are actually coming and warming to the idea of actually living in an apartment block with serviced accommodation, you know, like all their facilities on site. You can see the big massive change in America, where they've got the swimming pool on site, the gymnasium on site, and everybody shares it, but the number in the block are like 500 properties in the block. And I think
That's similar to the setup we've got at the Nairn building in Kirkcaldy. It's an amazing conversion, and it's got the underground garage, it's got the pool, it's got it's quite like, then it's all apartments right down to 1 bedrooms up to about 3. I think maybe 3, maybe 4. I think
is that the one off Victoria Road?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I've been in that, and they've converted that, and that's amazing, and that's really like that kind of living that you're talking about.
I mean, the British population's been grown by more than 500,000 a year for the last 20 years. Yet just over 175,000 homes have actually been built annually in that time. So we're not even keeping up with the demand in terms of that. So one solution is to build more apartments, and on the face of it, the facts stack up as they're cheaper to heat, which is going to be a big thing in the future, isn't it? And actually more modern style and better insulation is going to be important as well. And the views are often unique, and they use less land, as I'd said before. Take a look at it like this. When you think about it and you come back to the reality of this, look at overseas by country in apartments. It's important to look at Europe, for example, and how they live, and compared with the percentages of apartments lived in. Now, Spain is actually about 66%. Switzerland 63%, Greece is 59%, Germany's 56%, Italy 53%, and the EU average is 46%. Sweden 46%, France 34%, United Kingdom 15%.
It's a big difference, isn't it? It is.
It's a stark difference. I mean, it's not just big; it's stark. Look, United Kingdom 15, Spain 66. That's more than 4 times more.
And we have less land space than what they do.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at Fife itself. Here's a nice graph to illustrate this. So here we have look, classic example in Fife. 25.8% of the stock is actually flats. Terraced houses 24%. Semi-detaches about 26%, and detached 24%. So there's kind of an equilibrium there.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, I think most people will end up having to start off in flats. It used to be before. I mean, it used to be before. I used to hear people saying that, you know, Taylor Street, for example, and White Rose Terrace and all that, they were all the starter homes for people getting started for the first time. Most people just got their first home there, and then they graduated from there later on when they got a wee bit of money under their belt, and then they actually upgraded to maybe a terraced house from there.
It's true. I don't think it was just Taylor Street. I think there was a thing, I mean, certainly in the early 90s for me, when Billy and I got married and lots of our friends were doing it, you were the same in Leaving as well. So the Glebe Streets, the Gladstone Streets, the Durward Streets, all new families or couples that were getting married started off in those apartments because they were a great place to live. You were living near the towns, it was great commute, they were at a good price point. So actually as your starter, it was a really good start to your
And I would imagine if we were going into Cooper, would be Balgarvey, would be the Bonnygate. And in St Andrews, you'd probably be looking at people with Lamond Drive, Scooney Hill Road. So all these different options available to people to get started off for the first time. But now that's kind of completely changed, and you could see it there. There's a 26%, but that's actually better than the UK average when you look at 15%. Of the 160,000 households in Fife, it could be precise by saying 160,643. 25.8% of them were actually, which is 41,521, are actually in the apartments and flats. So even though only 1.2% of the country has residential property built on, that's another startling statistic as well.
Yeah,
1.2% of the country has residential property built on it, and an additional 3.5% are actually gardens. And yet, I mean, it's true, because when you travel out in the countryside, you see loads and loads of fields everywhere, don't you?
We do.
We're
blessed.
I never really thought about it, that when you take into account the 1.2% and the 3.5% are gardens, when you actually take that into account, that's 4.7. So about 95% of that, of the UK, the land is actually just green belt and fields and nothing built in it. But you actually feel that you've got mass concentration, don't you?
Mm-hmm. You do in certain areas. I think we're quite fortunate where we are, because you're really within a 5-6 minute drive to anywhere, and you could be in greens around, can't you? So we're quite lucky that way. But if you go to the towns, then it's not quite the same, is it? It is very different. You know, I used to live in Aberdeen, for instance, and that was very much kind of city living and city life. And even if you were in one of the outskirt towns, those towns had originally started small and just kept on growing. So again, you didn't have much green. So we are fortunate here, but I am quite surprised that actually it's an equal split in regards to apartments, terrace, detached. That's surprised me when we were looking at this.
Mm-hmm.
I just, for whatever reason in my mind, I just thought that would be a much lesser number, because I'm not conscious of seeing a lot of apartments.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would probably agree with you.
Maybe they were flats, though.
Maybe they were flats.
I've seen a lot of flats. Maybe don't seen a lot of apartments.
I like that illustration though, because I think it shows the how Fife differs for the rest of the country and the UK in a whole. And we've spoken about that before. How some stats we've looked at and Fife performs differently, because they're kind of like our own wee bubble up here, I think, sometimes.
The flat was always seen, as I said, as the first starter home. The flats as well. Well, look at, for example, in Methil, you had all the cottages were then converted into flats. They did that. I mean, the Clyde streets and stuff like that. You know, that was all then reconverted, wasn't it? All the miners' cottages. So that's probably a classic example of repurposing. And I'm sure it's like what Mark said about there is detached villas and stuff like that have actually been converted as well, because they're lending themselves to that. You see that a lot in St Monans, don't you? Probably George Terrace is one of the most prominent ones, where there is apartments, because there used to be 3 apartments, and then it was taken to a maisonette, one apartment underneath, and some people have actually reclaimed the whole thing and have one big block itself. You also possibly see it. Where else do you see it?
Well, we had that prime example, didn't we, in St Andrews as well, that one on King Street, which was a semi-detached house that was then converted into 2 apartments.
Subdivided into 2.
And they were absolutely stunning. They just flew out the door, those ones, because there is a demand for them. But it's like Mark said, it's not the general construction of what it was. People are now subdividing.
Yeah, there's a few in Cooper as well I've been in over the years that are originally houses split into apartments, and they're still really big apartments, flats, whatever you want to class them as. But
this is quite an interesting one that Mark's asked. What's the difference? And I'll see if I can answer this. What's the difference in value growth in Fife compared to small and medium houses? I believe, and I'm sure about this, there is statistics from our point of view, because we know how much they're going up, but there's not statistics kept for that in terms of, there's only the statistics kept by the Land Registry for the average price in Fife, which is around about £167,000 for a house now. But drilling that down, I think flats are exponentially increasing faster in price now in the last couple of years than terraced houses, semi-detached and detached properties. And that's predominantly because they're a low price point, plus the fact that they've now gained the attention of a lot of first-time buyers and also a lot of buy-to-let investors. So I think the flats have actually gone up significantly since then. Flats have been, flats have been really flat in terms of the price for the since the credit crunch. And it's only the last 3 years or something like that, Richard, that they've now begun to increase.
Yeah, and the interest from, like you say, a buy-to-let perspective as well, because you've got a lot of people who maybe aren't quite at the first-time buyer stage, but obviously want their first home, and that's really popular with them. I've just done a couple actually in the new build scheme at Thornton, Corthyn Court, and this is quite funny. I'll throw this in the mix, but I've listed them as executive apartments.
Ooh, the executive ones now.
But they're obviously ensuite bedrooms and a lot of living space, and they're really nice, and the square footage is really big, and obviously
So
value is high.
I take it there must have been a higher price point then.
Yes.
Yeah, and that to me, that's what probably determines whether you would actually say executive or just apartment or just a flat. I think it is a lot to do with the price point and how people view it and that mentality. I definitely think what we're seeing now, though, is flats are almost getting to the point where they're almost at the same price as a terraced house.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we've seen that change quite a bit, even just in the last 12 months, haven't we? We've had, you mentioned Taylor Street earlier, Jim. So we've had ones in Taylor Street, we've had Mackey Avenue, Letham Avenue, Leven, all of those ones, and the demand that we've had for those when they've come up, and they've exceeded expectations on the sellers.
Yeah, they're back to 60 and 70,000, aren't they? And yet, the credit crunch came along and they dropped to about 20 to 30. So they've doubled since that time in terms of the value. And I knew they would recover anyway, because I sold some just before the credit crunch and I was selling them at 60 and 70. So they've only returned back to what the price was before the credit crunch. Hence the reason why I believe, and it's the same with most flats and most properties like that. I believe they've only just recovered to the point that they should have recovered at the pre-credit crunch. And therefore, they've still got a lot of mileage left in them. Hence the reason why you're seeing some 2-bedroom flats now being priced at 80 grand. And 3 years ago, they were at 55.
Yeah,
that's a huge jump. But it's only realigning back to the natural price that they should have been in the first place. And I did say that the biggest growth will be in flats. Although, when you still see Zoopla in that, they're still saying the average price of a flat is going up less than a terraced house, a semi-detached, and a detached. But that's right across the UK. But I definitely think in Fife they've actually gone up exponentially more, and that will tell over time once we get more information, more feedback about that. But we are actually seeing that, and I actually saw one recently, as I said, round about the 80 grand mark, and we're selling them for round about that price. Terraced houses, they're breaking the 100,000 barrier now, aren't they?
Yep, yeah.
And in Glenrothes, they're breaking the 100,000 barrier as well, when they weren't before. And then also St Andrews, your flats, your 2-bedroom flats. I mean, we were getting 230, so they're probably touching 250 to 260 now. And yet we're selling a house in Scooney Hill for around about 250. And I'm thinking, wow, what a deal! When you think about Woodlands round the corner, I think it's Woodlands, was 230, and we sold that a couple of years ago. And then we've got a house going on just round the corner from it. It's mint condition in terrace, that 2 bedrooms and beautiful inside, and that's on at 250. I'm thinking, God, that's a really good price point. So there's almost an equilibrium there. So there needs to be a realignment then, if that's the case, in terms of terraced houses and possibly. I didn't think semi-detached. I think terraced houses are coming close. And the advantage of having a terrace house, well, the advantage of having a flat anyway, because you've got a garden anyway most of the time. You don't really share a garden with anywhere else if in the older style flats and apartments.
I think you're right with the semi-detached is still a wee bit out there in front, price point wise, but you did say that about the popularity of flats, and people were, like you say, because the 2 and 3 bedroom house thing was for buy-to-let investors and first-time buyers and everything kind of kicked off at the back of lockdown, or just as we were going through lockdown. And kind of there wasn't any focus on flats or apartments, but we had that conversation, Jim, and you were right that they have come around again.
Yeah. So we'll get back to this a bit, though. Even though that only 1.2% of the country has residential property built on it, and an additional 3.5% are gardens, building houses is low density land use. Is it sustainable in the long term? Continue to build that way in Britain, a country with a similar population to France, yet having less than half its land mass. That's probably quite key as well. If we continue to build just over 5 and 6 new households as houses, surely sooner or later the precious green belt around our towns and cities will actually have to go. Because you can't houses because you need land for it, and land, once it's gone, it's got a house on it, done.
Yeah. Even though you look at that stat of the amount of land that's already built on looks relatively low, I think if the government were actually to meet the figures that they're stated to do for new houses, if we were to continue at that rate, I mean, there will come a point when it's
you're going to have to build apartments.
Yeah.
I have a sneaking suspicion in leaving, you're going to see the whole of the docks redeveloped as prime apartments, probably on about 4 or 5 levels overlooking the sea.
Like what they've done at Dees Wharf and things in Kirkcaldy.
Yeah, I could see that happening in the Leavenworth area. I can see that also happening in other areas as well, where we need to have space minimisation, but actually use as much as possible with little as possible land. The country needs a really. I mean, here's the problem here. The country really needs a decent supply of homes for its growing and aging population. You take it like this: the aging population, when the average age for lifespan goes up 1 year, for example, that means they automatically have to find another 300,000 houses, because that's what it is every year to sustain the current population. So if the average lifespan lasts a year longer, then we're back by 300,000 houses already.
Exactly.
And it will continue. Many of you will frown when it has been suggested, even for environmental reasons alone. Most of these should actually be apartments and flats. Quite good comment from Andrea here. She actually says, with moving house being quite expensive, I think bigger flats and a good price will mean that first-time buyers will not need to move as quickly should the circumstances change, such as babies coming along.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good idea. Should we be going back to the 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom ex-local authority flat style, and have them like that? Because then you can grow into them for people that actually start off.
Yeah,
well, you say that, don't you? We've actually had situations where Fife Council have approached us about property that we're selling to buy some of them back again, because it's actually cheaper for them to buy them back, apparently, than it is for them to build them.
Funny enough, I had a conversation yesterday, Perry, with a builder, because I was out looking at his house, and he was actually saying, yes, it's actually more expensive to build than it is to buy. And that's why a lot of new builds are coming on, and they're astronomical figures compared to what's locally. And you think to yourself, why would you not just buy locally? And that's what it is. It's more expensive to build than it is to buy, because you've got all the requirements and for the new building regulations, new EPCs, new insulation, and then you've also got to take into account things like you've got to pay an additional price. Most people might not know about this, but you've got to pay extra money to go towards building a new school. So if you need a new school, when you're building 1,000 houses and it needs a new school, you've got to pay X amount per house towards the contribution towards the schools and the doctors and the dentists and everything, all the infrastructure improvements that go with that. So it's another additional cost over and above what you could have just bought individually from an existing house on the market.
Yeah, because like the new Kingsgate development at Kirkcaldy, they're obviously bringing in shops, a new school and everything, because there's 1,100 homes going there.
Yeah. Mark actually says a comment here. Other than location, what makes some flats more expensive in Fife compared to others? I've seen some for 50 and some for 120. I think it's to do with the building standards.
It's quality build and style.
It's like the apartments you just spoke about, Richard. Where was it? Glenrothes?
Yeah, Corthin Court.
Corthin Court. And then when you look at Cabri Court and Leaven, you've got these apartments. I mean, these apartments are sitting at 150, 160,000, and yet they're only 2 bedrooms. And yet you can get, the same sort of footprint round the corner, but just ex-local authority, which is significantly almost half the price less. So it does have a lot to do with build quality now, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you've got the nice fixtures.
I think it is build quality and it's that and its location, isn't it? It's the build quality and location. So those ones in Carberry that you speak about, you're close to the beach, etc., versus being in a kind of town centre part of that location. So people view them very differently, don't they?
You can take the equilibrium of location, because you can see in Leaven, an ex-local authority 2-bedroom flat is 75,000, and yet in St Andrews, that exact same ex-local authority flat is about 250,000. It's a huge difference, isn't it? It's about more than 3 times that price, but they're exactly the same properties. It's all to do with location. So that's the 2 extremes, I would say, one from the other. Although Leaven, I think, will actually begin to come up, possibly with the train station coming along. in 2024 to I'll say 2024 to 2025. Qualify myself there because they're saying 2024, but I know what they're like sometimes. We all know what they're like, actually, don't we? Don't get me wrong. There's a love-hate relationship with the apartments and the flats, and the British is well-founded. Many apartments and flats in Britain are not suitable for a happy family living. The high-rise ghetto council blocks. This is the council blocks we're talking about. This is the ones that we're talking about, like, for example, Cullen and Durris that were built in Glenrothes in the 1960s. Didn't help with the poor communal areas and the lack of maintenance and the lifts that didn't work. Wow, they had lifts. Really? There was lifts. I'm not sure if they had them, but they didn't.
No, we didn't.
But we're talking about, Birmingham and that as well. If you take that into account, they had lifts as well. But that was never a sustainable model because the ongoing costs to actually look after all that was unreasonable considering the type of person that was actually going to live in it, and it was actually done for. So I don't think that's possibly sustainable. Maybe the one that's local to here, the two are local to here, which has actually been refurbished quite well, and in Glenrothes as well. Rayburn Heights, Glenrothes, yeah. And then you've also got Memorial Court, and then you've got down the front Ravenscraig and Kirkcaldy. Yeah. So these are all the ones that have actually got lifts in them, and they've actually been really good, successful, sustainable models, haven't they?
Yeah, I've got a few rentals in both Rayburn and Ravenscraig.
Yeah, and I bet you, Richard, you're probably paying less of a factor fee than I am, and I've not even got lifts at Mill Street in Kirkcaldy.
Yeah, the factor fees are definitely less than what you're paying at Mill Street.
That's mental, eh? And yet you've got a lift, you've got a concierge, you've got everything like that. Yeah. So what model are they operating? It's allowing them to be able to do that at such a cost-effective level, and yet I've got we've got 8 in a block. I think that's the problem here. Whereas Rayburn Heights, Memorial Court, you've got 200 maybe.
Yeah.
So it is economies of scale, isn't it? And I think that will have to happen more and more. So why do so many more Europeans live in apartments, Perry? I mean, why is that?
Well, to be honest, I think the way that they operate them, and they've all got aircon as well, haven't they? So there's a nice way of living in there, and they're set up properly for it. So in mainland Europe, the apartments there are larger as well. So their apartment space, according to what we've looked at here in Germany, for instance, 974 square foot. Yeah. In Denmark, it's 1,452 square feet, and in the UK, our average apartment size is 793. So I think it's to do with exactly what we were saying earlier on in the programme about the fact that, you go to some of these new build ones and they're kind of small box rooms versus the fourplexes that we used to have where they were like houses but on one level. In Europe, they seem to be building them so much more bigger. So people are quite happy to live there, aren't they? They don't feel confined.
Yeah. Mark actually said, what's a condo? It's an American term. Yeah, it really doesn't get used here at all, or in Europe at all. A condo is an American term for a condominium, which is basically another word for a flat or an apartment.
Yeah. Or is it an apartment?
So is this a vicious circle then?
I think it is a vicious circle because, poorly made small apartments, they make the family step aside. And then that makes new home builders construct apartments unsuitable for families. And then it just makes the situation worse. And the result in the British property market trying to expand outside towns and cities and outwards into the countryside with houses rather than upwards in apartment blocks or blocks of flats, should I say.
Yeah. I'm not suggesting like 20-story high-rise blocks here in Fife for 1 second. So just get that right. Looking deeper into the information from Europe, most people live in low-rise 3 to 4 story purpose-built apartment blocks, but they are actually designed properly for an extended family later on. They're not just like it's 2 pokey rooms, and if 3 years later you've got to move out if you're having a kid, that is not a sustainable model, because then that's a turnover, and then what you have is a transient population in that block Therefore, it doesn't really take care of the area, and it's a spiraling downwind because they don't get into the pattern of looking after the upper landings. They don't get into the pattern of keeping regular maintenance. They don't get into the pattern of looking after the garden. They don't buy into it because they realise they're only going to be there short term. It's kind of like the rental market, isn't it, Richard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unless you are able to feel like it's your home and you're going to be there for a substantial period of time, then you're not going to have that same connection with it. You're not going to look after it the same because you're always in the back of your mind thinking, I'm going to need to move as soon as my situation changes.
Yeah. So it is about making it justifiable, desirable for families, extended families later on, and for people in the local population. The building materials used and stuff like that, the communal spaces, the building's functionality, the design specifications must not only meet but exceed the current building specs on houses, or planning permission should be withheld. I mean, it should, and we should strive to exceed it, because we're only going to end up being a master of our own destiny. So if you only build it to current regulations, guess what's going to happen? Regulations will get increased later on, and then it'll not be the proper regulations anymore. So is there a thought process that we should actually be building it way beyond current regulations just now? And should we be forcing building companies to do that?
There's an element of that, isn't there? But I think the government potentially could step in as well, couldn't they? I mean, they could be incentivising builders to build flats, apartments, flats, whatever we want to call them, instead of houses. And that would improve the supply, but it would also improve the quality of the apartments, and they get the tax breaks for building those. So, builders are in the business to make money. So they're not going to build apartments versus houses that are going to sell much more expensively. So
well, it's a classic example. You're only all going to buy into it if it's legislated for.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not, then you're obviously not going to want to follow it, because then it will make you disproportionately higher cost structure compared to someone else that's building something similar. It looks similar from the outside, but on the inside, it's actually not as good, because they've used actually probably low quality materials. So that's why we have the minimum building regulations anyway. But I think there's an argument possibly to be building just beyond that to make sure you have better quality to actually future-proof the property. It's going to take decades to change. There's no doubt about that. Yet, I thought it was appropriate to discuss the matter in this environment as it is right now. I mean, these are my thoughts. What is anybody else's thoughts out there? That's really what I'm asking. Let's just wrap up here. I mean, Perry, what's your final thoughts on this? Is it something we've got to? Do we have to build more flats, more apartments? Are they going to have to be more? Are they going to have to be more adaptable for growing families? Are we going to have to take out less land when we do that? Is this the future we should see?
I think it's the only way forward, and certainly we're seeing that in the way that the pricing structure is working for it. And if you think of what we demonstrated earlier on as well, that a quarter of what we have in Fife is apartments and flats. There absolutely is a demand there for it, isn't there? And we've got lots of green belt where we can do that and build them on and not use as much land, but actually accommodate more homes. But they do need to be done to a standard that families are comfortable and feel that they can live in them. I get the fact that we need to have, starter homes for just young professional couples, but you need family homes as well, because not all of those families are then going to be able to step up and buy those semi-detached houses with gardens that they need. But they need to have good space that they can live in just now. But also I want to touch on the bit that you mentioned earlier, and I think that's really important as well, about the fact that if it's a quick stop place to live to then move on, it then just becomes, as you say, transient, but also there's no community feel then, and there's no buy-in to look after it and take care of it. And then that's when you see the deterioration of it. And then suddenly they just become like the ones that nobody wants to live in now. And then we're back in the same position, aren't we? So they definitely do need to come with that high level ending so that communities stay there for a longer period of time. And if their circumstances change, that a family extends, they don't necessarily need to worry about where they're going to live after that. And they can still function in the home that they've started to build. But I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that everybody has an ISA on their landing, sticking a nose through your letterbox and sticking the landing to see what you're all getting up to. But, it does need to be a long-term plan too, because not everyone else is in the short-term view.
Yeah. Richard, in terms of the rental market, the lettings market, how do you see things panning out in terms of flats and apartments? Is this the way to go? Is this the future of appropriate investment?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and it's clear to everybody at the moment that there's an issue with housing. We need to build more housing. And I think flats and apartment are really the way forward with that. I don't think we're or expect to see any like big high-rise blocks popping up everywhere. But I think to utilise the space that we've got to build these kind of apartments that will facilitate maybe first-time buyers, first-time renters, allow them to grow into that home rather than just it be a stopgap. And I think to give the builders incentive to do that as well, kind of will all marry up to give us a lot better use of what space we've got, rather than just keep building houses which are maybe out of some people's reach.
Yeah, I definitely think we need to move back to the local authority, ex-local authority, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom properties. I mean, you know, there's a move away from the council because they thought that wasn't the need for anyone. But if you're wanting somebody to buy into the long-term future, as you said, Perry, you need to actually give them accommodation which they could grow into. Rather more than anything. Plus, from a social housing point of view, it's more affordable to build the apartment in the flat than it is to actually to build individual houses for people with back gardens, front gardens, and driveways and everything like that. You could actually easily accommodate that into flats with the old model that we used before, which was all the huge influx into social housing building, which was, I think it was just after the war. They just decided, right, let's get on with it. Let's put a proper infrastructure in place. 69% of the social housing was sold off in the 80s. And that's why we're on the back foot already in terms of social and council housing. That's why there's not enough affordable housing for people out there. And that's just making it worse for people getting on the ladder for the first time. And it's making it difficult for everybody as well. Again, if anybody's wanting to comment on that, please feel free to. More than happy to take your comments later on. That's us wrapping up here. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Perry and Richard. And we'll look forward to this weekend's morning show, which is, Perry, what's it all going to be about? Can we remember? I think we're talking about colour schemes and browns and all the rest of it. We're into autumn now. So we're going to be doing
for autumn and winter.
That's right. We're getting everybody prepared for that. So we're going to see everybody on that live at 9:30 on Saturday morning. We've got the usual wealth creation show at 12:30 on a Monday, Richard, and then we'll be back to the midweek show for tomorrow. I've already got the content for the midweek show for tomorrow, and it's going to be for next week, and it's going to be really exciting. Okay, thanks very much, guys, and bye-bye from him and her.
Bye.